The rain hammered against the recruitment center windows as Maya stood in line, her hand unconsciously rubbing the long scar that ran down her left leg. 23 years old, 5 feet 4 inches of determination wrapped in a body that had been broken and rebuilt. The other candidates around her looked perfect, polished, ready. She looked like someone who had crawled through hell and decided to go back for seconds. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The sergeant at the front desk was a mountain of a man named Briggs, with shoulders that could carry trucks and a voice that could strip paint. When Maya handed him her application, he barely glanced at it before his eyes locked onto her leg. The scar was visible even through her pants, a twisted reminder of the accident that had shattered her femur, tibia, and any hopes her family had of her living a normal life. Briggs looked up at her with something between pity and annoyance. He had seen hundreds of hopefuls walk through these doors, but few as damaged as this one. The Special Forces training program was not a place for charity cases. It was where the best came to become better, where perfect specimens of human performance pushed beyond human limits. Maya met his gaze without flinching. She had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times. She knew what people saw when they looked at her. She knew the whispers that followed her everywhere. Poor girl, such a shame. She used to be so athletic. Should have stayed in accounting. Briggs sighed and stamped her application with more force than necessary. He pointed toward the assessment area where other candidates were already warming up. Maya could see them stretching, jogging, performing perfect lunges and high kicks. They moved like dancers, like predators, like people whose bodies had never betrayed them. She limped toward the group, her leg protesting with every step. The physical therapist had told her she would always have a limp. The doctors had told her she would never run again. Her mother had begged her to find a nice desk job and forget about the dreams she had harbored since childhood. But Maya had spent 2 years in rehabilitation, 2 years of agony and small victories, 2 years of proving every expert wrong. She was not about to stop now. The other candidates noticed her immediately. A woman with perfect blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail nudged her friend and whispered something. A man built like a professional athlete smirked and shook his head. Another candidate, a tall guy with the kind of confidence that came from never failing at anything, actually laughed out loud. The assessment began with basic exercises. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups. Maya performed adequately, her upper body strength compensating for what her leg lacked. But then came the running trials, and that was where things fell apart. Her limp became more pronounced as she circled the track, each step a small negotiation between her will and her body's limitations. She finished dead last, nearly a full minute behind the next slowest candidate. More whispers, more pitying looks. Briggs stood with his clipboard, marking something with aggressive slashes of his pen. When the group gathered for the next phase, he did not even try to hide his skepticism. The obstacle course loomed before them like a medieval torture device. Walls to climb, ropes to swing from, barriers to vault over, tunnels to crawl through. It was designed to separate the capable from the exceptional, to find those rare individuals who could push through pain and exhaustion and still maintain perfect form. The blonde woman went first, attacking the course with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of training. She cleared every obstacle with grace, her movements fluid and confident. Time, 4 minutes and 32 seconds. Briggs nodded approvingly and marked it down. The athletic man went next, treating the course like a personal playground. He actually smiled as he vaulted over barriers and scaled walls. Time, 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Briggs allowed himself a small smile. These were the kind of candidates the program needed. One by one, the others went through. Some succeeded, some failed, but none were as slow or as clumsy as they expected Maya to be. When her turn came, the whispers stopped. People were openly placing bets now, discussing whether she would even make it past the first wall. Maya stood at the starting line, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The first obstacle was a 7-foot wall with minimal handholds. Behind her, she heard someone say she would be lucky to get halfway up. Someone else laughed and suggested they just skip her turn to save everyone time. Briggs blew the whistle. Maya ran toward the wall, her gait uneven but determined. She hit it at full speed, her hands finding the first holds before her brain could tell her body it was impossible. Her right leg, the strong one, pushed off hard. Her left leg, The broken one that had been rebuilt with titanium pins and sheer stubbornness swung up and found purchase. She climbed. Not gracefully, not beautifully, but with a savage efficiency that silenced the crowd. Her injured leg did not work the way it should, so she made it work differently. She used her upper body strength, her core, her right leg, and whatever her left leg could contribute. She adapted on the fly, finding routes up the wall that the others had not even considered because their perfect bodies had not needed to. She reached the top in seconds. Behind her, she heard someone gasp. Briggs looked at his stopwatch and frowned as if suspecting it was broken. The next obstacle was a rope swing over a mud pit. Maya grabbed the rope and launched herself across without hesitation. Her landing was rough, her bad leg buckling slightly, but she rolled with it and kept moving. The tunnel crawl was next, and here her smaller frame was an advantage. She moved through it like water, emerging on the other side before some of the larger candidates had even entered. But the real test was coming. The final obstacle was a 15-foot wall, smooth and unforgiving. It was called the breaker because it broke spirits and bodies in equal measure. The only way up was pure upper body strength and technique. Even the best candidates struggled with it. Maya stared up at the wall. Her left leg was screaming now, the old injury making itself known with sharp stabs of pain. Her arms were tired from the previous obstacles. Every logical part of her brain told her to quit, to walk away, to accept that she had done well enough just to make it this far. She thought about the accident. The drunk driver who had run a red light. The moment of impact. The sound of her leg shattering. The months in the hospital where she had stared at the ceiling and wondered if her life was over at 21. The first time she had tried to walk again and collapsed in tears. The 100th time she had tried and made it 3 steps. The 1,000th time when she had made it across the room. Maya ran at the wall. Her hands caught the top edge on the first jump, using momentum and timing that she had practiced until her hands bled. For a moment she hung there, her body swaying, her injured leg dangling uselessly. The crowd held its breath. This was where she would fall, where gravity and reality would win. But Maya had not spent 2 years fighting her body to give up now. She pulled, her arms screaming, her core engaged, every muscle in her body contributing to the effort. Her right leg found a tiny imperfection in the wall and pushed. Her left leg, useless for pushing, swung up and hooked over the edge. It was ugly and desperate and nothing like the textbook technique, but it worked. She hauled herself over the top of the wall and dropped down the other side. The finish line was 20 feet away. Maya ran, her limp more pronounced than ever, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She crossed the line and immediately bent over, hands on her knees, fighting to stay conscious. Briggs looked at his stopwatch. He looked at it again. He shook it as if convinced it was malfunctioning. Then he held it up for everyone to see. 3 minutes and 57 seconds, not just fast, the fastest of the entire group. 35 seconds faster than the athletic man who had treated the course like a joke. Almost 40 seconds faster than the blonde woman with her perfect form and practiced efficiency. The silence was absolute. The candidates who had laughed at Maya now stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to something that looked like fear. How had this broken girl, this limping reject, destroyed their times? It was impossible. It had to be a mistake, but Briggs knew it was not a mistake. He had been running these assessments for 15 years. He had seen thousands of candidates, from Olympic athletes to decorated soldiers. He knew the difference between natural talent and something forged in fire. Maya was not the most naturally gifted person he had ever seen. She was something else entirely. She was someone who had learned to win when winning should have been impossible. The training program began the following Monday. 30 candidates had been accepted, including Maya. The first week was designed to be brutal, a shock to the system that would weed out anyone who lacked the mental fortitude for what was to come. They woke at 4:30 in the morning and did not stop until 10 at night. Every moment was filled with pain, exhaustion, and the constant pressure of instructors who seemed to take pleasure in finding weaknesses. Maya's weakness was obvious to everyone. Her leg limited her in ways that would have disqualified her from any normal program. But this was not a normal program, and the lead instructor, Commander Vale, was not a normal instructor. Vale was a woman who had come up through the ranks when the Special Forces did not accept women, who had fought in wars that were supposed to be impossible to survive, who had earned every scar on her body and every gray hair on her head. Vale watched Maya closely during those first weeks. She saw how the other candidates treated her, with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. She saw how Maya pushed through exercises that should have been impossible for someone with her injury. She saw the way Maya adapted, finding new methods and techniques that circumvented her physical limitations. But Vale also saw the cost. She saw Maya sneaking ice packs to her room at night. She saw the way Maya's face would go white with pain during certain movements. She saw a young woman who was destroying her body to prove a point, and Vale had seen that story before. It usually ended with a medical discharge and a lifetime of regret. 3 weeks into training, Vale called Maya into her office. It was a small room, Spartan and functional, with walls covered in maps and photos from operations that officially did not exist. Maya stood at attention, her leg trembling slightly from the day's exertions. Vale did not believe in wasting words. She asked Maya why she was there, why she was putting herself through this. Maya gave the answer she had prepared about wanting to serve her country, about proving that disabled people could contribute, about overcoming adversity. It was a good answer, the kind of answer that sounded impressive in interviews and applications. Vale told her to sit down and try again, this time with the truth. Maya sat, her carefully constructed facade cracking. The truth was messier and more complicated. The truth was that before the accident, Maya had been good at everything. Sports, academics, social situations, everything came easily. She had glided through life on natural talent and charm, never really pushing herself because she had never needed to. Then the accident had taken it all away, and for the first time in her life, Maya had to actually fight for something. She had discovered that she liked fighting. She liked the challenge of doing something that should be impossible. She liked proving people wrong. She liked the person she became when she was pushed to her absolute limit. The accident had broken her body but built her character, and now she was addicted to that feeling of overcoming. She did not just want to be in the special forces. She needed it. She needed the challenge, the impossibility of it, the chance to prove to herself over and over again that she could do things that should not be possible. Vale listened without judgment. When Maya finished, Vale told her about the first time she had been shot, in a desert that officially did not exist, during an operation that officially never happened. The bullet had shattered her collarbone, and the doctors had told her she would never carry a rifle again. Vale had proven them wrong through sheer stubbornness and anger. She understood the addiction Maya described. She had lived it, but Vale also warned her. There was a difference between pushing through pain and ignoring damage. A difference between toughness and stupidity. The special forces needed people who could adapt and survive, not people who would push until they broke completely. If Maya wanted to make it through this program, she needed to be smart about her limitations, not just aggressive. Maya took the advice to heart. She began working with the program's physical therapist, developing specific exercises and techniques that worked with her injury rather than against it. She started asking for help from other candidates, learning from their strengths to compensate for her weaknesses. She stopped trying to do everything exactly like everyone else and started finding her own path. The change was remarkable. Her performance improved, but more importantly, her injury became less of a liability. She was never going to be the fastest runner or the strongest climber, but she became one of the best problem solvers. When the team faced an obstacle, Maya was often the first to find an unconventional solution. Her years of adapting to her injured leg had taught her to think differently, to find paths that others missed. 8 weeks into the program, during a nighttime navigation exercise, Maya's squad got pinned down during a simulated combat scenario. They were supposed to reach a checkpoint within a certain time limit, but the instructors had set up a perfect ambush. The obvious routes were all covered. The squad leader, a former Marine named Jackson, called for suggestions. The athletic man from the initial assessment, whose name was Derek, suggested a frontal assault. The blonde woman, Amanda, suggested a wide flanking maneuver. Both options would work, but both would take too much time. They would miss the deadline and fail the exercise. Maya studied the situation. They were in a dense forest with a steep hillside to their left. The hillside was why no one was suggesting that route. It was too steep, too treacherous, especially at night. For most people, it would be suicide to attempt. But Maya's injured leg had taught her that the hardest path was often the least defended. She explained her idea. They would split into 2 groups. The main group would create a diversion with the frontal assault, making the instructors think that was the real plan. Meanwhile, a small team would use the hillside route. It would be brutal and dangerous, but if they could make it work, they would come in behind the instructors and reach the checkpoint easily. Jackson asked the obvious question: who would take the hillside route? It required climbing skills and endurance that would push even the best candidates to their limits. Maya volunteered, along with 2 other candidates who trusted her judgment. Jackson was skeptical but desperate. The clock was ticking. He agreed to the plan. The climb was everything Maya had feared and more. The hillside was loose rock and exposed roots, treacherous even with proper equipment and daylight. In the dark with minimal gear, it was a nightmare. Maya's leg protested with every step, her old injury a constant source of agony. The other 2 candidates struggled as well, but they followed Maya's lead, trusting her to find the safest route. Halfway up, one of the candidates, a quiet guy named Chen, slipped and nearly fell. Maya caught him, her fingers digging into his gear, her injured leg screaming as it took the full weight of both of them. For a terrible moment, they hung there on the edge of disaster. Then Maya's training kicked in. The countless hours of rehabilitation and adaptation. She found her balance, found a solid foothold, and pulled Chen back to safety. They reached the top with minutes to spare and came down behind the instructors, just as the main group launched their diversion. The instructors never saw them coming. Maya's team reached the checkpoint with 30 seconds left on the clock. When the exercise ended and everyone gathered for the debrief, Briggs was there with Commander Vale. He still looked at Maya with skepticism, still seemed to doubt that someone with her limitations belonged in the program. But Vale was smiling, a rare expression that made some of the candidates nervous. Vale explained what had happened, how Maya's team had accomplished something that should have been impossible. She talked about adaptive thinking, about using limitations as advantages, about the difference between following the textbook and writing your own. Then she said something that made Maya's heart race. The Special Forces did not need perfect soldiers. Perfect soldiers followed orders and maintained standards and did everything by the book. The Special Forces needed people who could solve impossible problems, who could adapt and overcome when everything went wrong, who could turn weaknesses into weapons. That was what made someone truly exceptional. Briggs did not look convinced, but he did not argue. He had been in the military long enough to recognize when someone above him in the chain of command was making a point. The training continued for another 4 months. There were wins and losses, triumphs and failures. Maya was never the best at any single skill, but she became invaluable to her team. When problems arose that could not be solved through conventional methods, Maya found another way. Her leg remained a liability in some situations, but she had learned to work around it so well that it sometimes seemed like an advantage. The final test was a 72-hour field exercise that simulated a real Special Forces operation. The candidates were divided into teams and given an objective deep in hostile territory. They had to navigate, survive, and complete the mission with minimal supplies and constant pressure from instructors playing enemy forces. Maya's team was led by Jackson, and it included Derek, Amanda, Chen, and 2 other candidates named Sarah and Marcus. They were a good team, balanced and capable, but the exercise was designed to break even the best groups. The instructors knew every trick, every shortcut, every weakness. 20 hours into the exercise, things started going wrong. Sarah twisted her ankle badly during a river crossing. Marcus came down with severe dehydration. The team's progress slowed to a crawl, and they began falling behind schedule. If they did not reach the objective within the time limit, they would fail, and failure in the final exercise meant being dropped from the program. Jackson called a team meeting at 3:17 in the morning. They were exhausted, hungry, and running out of options. The objective was still 15 miles away through difficult terrain. With Sarah injured and Marcus weakened, there was no way they would make it in time using conventional methods. Derek suggested leaving the injured and weak behind. It was cold logic, the kind of decision that sometimes had to be made in real operations. A team could not sacrifice the mission for individuals. Jackson considered it but ultimately rejected the idea. They would succeed or fail as a team. Maya had been studying the map by flashlight, her mind racing through possibilities. She pointed out a route that no one else had considered, a narrow canyon system that would cut the distance by more than half. The problem was that the canyon was treacherous, prone to flash floods, and according to the map, it ended at a vertical rock face that would require technical climbing to overcome. Amanda pointed out the obvious problems. They did not have climbing gear. Sarah was injured. Marcus was weak. The risk was enormous. But Maya had noticed something about that rock face during the initial briefing. The map showed it as vertical, but the satellite imagery suggested it might be less steep than indicated. Maps could be wrong, especially in areas that change due to erosion and weather. If the rock face was even slightly less vertical than the map suggested, they might be able to climb it without gear. Jackson knew it was a gamble. But they were out of safe options. He made the decision to trust Maya's instincts. The canyon was as treacherous as advertised. They had to help Sarah and Marcus through difficult sections, supporting each other with improvised harnesses and sheer determination. The darkness made everything worse, turning every step into a potential disaster. But Maya led them through, her experience with adapted movement allowing her to find the safest paths. They reached the rock face at 5:47 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, providing their first good look at the obstacle. Maya had been right. The rock face was steep but not quite vertical, maybe 75 degrees. Still incredibly difficult, especially without proper gear, but possible. Maya volunteered to go first to find the route and test the holds. Derek protested, saying someone with 2 good legs should lead. But Jackson overruled him. Maya had gotten them this far. She had earned the right to finish what she started. The climb was the hardest thing Maya had ever done. Every movement required calculation and courage. Her injured leg was almost useless for pushing, so she relied on her upper body strength and her right leg, finding holds and angles that worked with her limitations. Halfway up, her leg cramped badly, the muscles seizing in protest. She hung there for a moment, breathing through the pain, wondering if this was finally the moment her body gave out completely. But then she looked down and saw her team watching her. Sarah with her twisted ankle. Marcus still pale from dehydration. Chen, who she had saved on that hillside weeks ago. Amanda and Derek, who had started as skeptics but had become believers. Jackson, who had trusted her judgment even when it seemed crazy. Maya climbed. She found holds that should not have worked and made them work. She used techniques that were not in any manual because she had invented them out of necessity. Her injured leg, usually a burden, became just another tool to be adapted and utilized. She reached the top and secured a rope for the others. One by one, the team climbed up. They helped each other, compensated for each other's weaknesses, functioned as a unit. They reached the objective with 17 minutes to spare, exhausted and battered but successful. When they returned to base and reported to Commander Vale, they were met with something close to celebration. Several teams had failed the final exercise. Several more had succeeded but had taken the easier routes and made predictable decisions. Maya's team had done something exceptional. They had taken risks, adapted to circumstances, and succeeded through unconventional thinking. Graduation was 2 weeks later. Of the 30 candidates who had started the program, only 18 finished. Maya stood in formation with her classmates wearing her dress uniform, her injured leg hidden but present as always. Briggs was there, still massive and intimidating. But when he handed Maya her certificate, he did something unexpected. He shook her hand and told her he had been wrong about her. The Special Forces needed people who could overcome the impossible, and she had proven she could do exactly that. Commander Vale gave the final address. She talked about the nature of elite forces, about what separated the good from the exceptional. She said that in her experience, the best operators were rarely the ones who had natural advantages. The best operators were the ones who had faced real adversity and learned to overcome it. They were the ones who had been broken and rebuilt themselves. They were the ones who looked at impossible situations and found a way through. As Vale spoke, Maya felt her injured leg ache. It would always ache. The doctors had been right about that. She would never be free of the pain, never be able to forget what had happened on that terrible night when a drunk driver had changed her life forever. But standing there with her classmates, having accomplished something that dozens of doubters had said was impossible, Maya realized something important. The accident had not taken her dreams away. It had just made her strong enough to achieve them. The injury that everyone had seen as a weakness had forced her to develop strengths that others never needed to discover. Her limitations had become her advantages. Her scars had become her credentials. After graduation, Maya was assigned to a special operations unit that specialized in unconventional warfare. Her first team leader was a veteran operator named Harris, who reviewed her file with obvious skepticism. Another broken candidate pushed through by politically correct policies, he probably thought. Another accommodation they would have to make. On their first training exercise, the team had to infiltrate a mock enemy facility through a drainage system that was supposed to be too small for an adult to navigate. Harris was about to call off that approach when Maya volunteered. Her smaller frame and experience with adapted movement allowed her to squeeze through spaces that others could not. She opened a door from the inside, and the team completed the exercise in record time. Harris never questioned her capabilities again. Over the following months, Maya proved herself again and again. She was never the fastest or the strongest, but she was consistently the most adaptable. When operations went wrong, and they always went wrong eventually, Maya was the one who found solutions that others missed. 3 years later, Maya was part of a team deployed to a situation that officially did not exist in a place that could not be named. The operation went bad in ways that no one had predicted. The team was pinned down, wounded, and running out of options. The enemy had every route covered. The extraction point was impossible to reach. By every tactical analysis, they were finished. Maya looked at the situation and saw something else. She saw a route that should not work. A path that the enemy would never expect because it required movements and risks that normal operators would not consider. She explained her idea to the team leader, who listened with the same skepticism that Maya had faced her entire career. But the team leader remembered his training, remembered what Commander Vale had said about unconventional thinking. He gave Maya permission to try. Maya led her team through terrain that should have been impassable, using techniques and tactics that were not in any manual, because she had learned them by necessity. Her injured leg, which had once been seen as her greatest weakness, had taught her how to move differently, how to find paths that others could not see. She saved her team that night, got them to the extraction point when conventional tactics would have failed. When they returned to base, the after-action report included a notation that Maya's actions had prevented a catastrophic failure. But Maya did not care about reports or commendations. She cared about the fact that her team had trusted her, that her adaptations had made a difference, that she had turned her greatest liability into her greatest asset. Years later, when Maya retired from active service and became an instructor herself, she thought about that day at the recruitment center. She thought about Briggs's skeptical look, about the whispers and laughter about being the broken girl who did not belong. She thought about proving them wrong, not through anger or spite, but through sheer determination and adaptation. Now she stood in front of new classes of candidates, looking for the ones who had something to prove. She looked for the injured, the damaged, the ones who had been told they were not good enough, because she knew from experience that those were often the ones who became exceptional. They were the ones who had learned to adapt, to overcome, to turn weaknesses into weapons. She still limped. The injury had never fully healed, and it never would. But when new candidates saw her limp and wondered how someone like her could be an instructor in an elite program, she smiled. She knew they would understand eventually, if they survived the training. They would learn that limitations were just opportunities in disguise, that scars were proof of survival, that the hardest paths often led to the greatest destinations, and when those candidates faced their own version of that 15-foot wall, their own impossible obstacle, she hoped they would remember her. She hoped they would remember that someone with a shattered leg had climbed faster than anyone else, not despite her injury but because of what it had taught her, that sometimes being broken was just the first step to becoming unbreakable.